I investigated all kinds of spiritual options from the time I was 8, actually. And I first, it's a very long story, but I joined the Los Angeles Temple, distributed books for many years, and that was a very dear service to me. And produced books. I worked in book production for about 35, 37 years, something along those lines. And I'm passionate about preaching and ending the oppression of Vaishnavis in ISKCON.
Yeah. Radha Dasi, would you like to share with us next?
Yes. My mother was African American and my father is a first generation Chinese immigrant. So I grew up with values that included social justice and removing discrimination, removing barriers. I went to law school because I thought that was the best way to achieve this goal. And in law school, I realized that when you solve a problem for someone, immediately another problem arises. I wasn't familiar with the law of karma at that time, but exactly being. So I was frustrated, lost, discouraged. Someone gave me a Bhagavad Gita. I read the introduction and said, this is the answer I've been looking for. Then I found out it was associated with the Hare Krishnas. And I said, wait, I can't do that. So it took me a number of years, 4 or 5 years, to actually commit to the practice of bhakti yoga, but I've never regretted it. And this is the thing that is the real solution to social injustice, because the root of social injustice is that we don't care about each other. We don't see each other as valuable. So when we truly learn and apply this philosophy, we will have a just society.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Kusha Prabhu, would you like to share with us next?
You're muted, Kusha. You have to unmute yourself.
Somebody muted me. I wasn't muted. And I won't be muted. I joined here in Hawaii, and I was raised in a very melting pot society in terms of multiracial, multicultural society here in Hawaii. My mother was she's still a very strong woman, and being the eldest of 3 girls, and she was the eldest child too, we never really had to fight for our seniority or our position. And so I never tried until I had a daughter. And when I had a daughter, the inequities of the gender bias within our society became poignant to me. And before that, it didn't matter, really wasn't all that important. Who cares if they wanted to play cootie queens and all that like we did when we were little children. But all of a sudden, I needed to be present for the ladies, and I needed to make a difference. But I became a devotee at the age of 17, and I moved in at the age of 18. And I met the devotees wearing a sari, interestingly enough. I happened to be really into yoga, and I was going to take Hindi at the University of Hawaii, and I was learning to put on a sari. And how I met the devotees, being that I was wearing a sari, people were saying, your people are over there. So I went over there, and there they were. And I haven't left yet. I'm not planning to.
Thank you. Shyamala Kishori, would you like to share with us next?
Grateful, everyone. It's a great honor to be here with all of you. I was born in the mid-1980s, and it was interesting. I recently read some of the history of the 1980s in terms of Vaishnavis. So it was kind of interesting reflecting on the time period I was born in from that angle. I lived the first few years of my life in Radha in Belgium. My mother's from Belgium and my father's American. Then we moved to USA. I lived a few years in Detroit, but the bulk of my Krishna conscious upbringing was in North Carolina, Nucaloka community. And my parents are disciples of Srila Prabhupada. When I was growing up, I would hear a lot about how the struggles of Prabhupada's female disciples. My mother shared things with me and other devotees that I would hear from. So that was kind of always on my radar, a sadness about how Prabhupada's female disciples were not treated with respect and dignity in the way they deserved to be. So that was something that kind of was present for me. And then also growing up female in ISKCON, I had my own mixed experiences, which maybe we'll get into more later. But I guess you could say passion as far as like spiritually, well, I am interested in women's subjects. I went back recently to UF, got my master's in women's studies because of my interest in this topic. But I am, as far as Krishna consciousness goes, I'm very passionate about making Krishna consciousness relevant and relatable and applicable, to all kinds of people, welcoming to everyone, so that no one feels left out or discriminated against. A real welcoming space for people.
Thank you so much. Before we go on, I just want to mention that we are going to leave time at the end for questions, but if anyone does have a question during the course of the discussion, please feel free to unmute yourself or you can message it into the chat. We also have an anonymous question link that will be shared in the chat that if you want to share something personal, somebody else will read it out for you. And Mother Kusha, I just am letting you know that we had to mute you, unfortunately, because there was a lot of background noise. So just whenever you're speaking next, you may have to unmute yourself. So the first question that I have for all of you is I wanted to talk about the perceptions of women that are so deeply ingrained into the fabric of ISKCON. A lot of them we're not even consciously aware of. And it can be really interesting because we have this beautiful philosophy. And then when we see the practical application of it, especially as a woman, it can be quite confusing and heartbreaking. So I wondered if you could talk about a little bit about what these perceptions are and how can we change them, and because they've been a part of our society even from the very beginning.
Are you going to place that question to an individual? There's Kusha.
Whoever feels inspired to answer.
I have a question for everyone, actually, before I would answer the question. Is you spoke as if you perceive that yourself, Sham Mandali. Like, I have that experience, but I don't know that you or anyone else on this call has that experience. So I'm curious to know, is this a question that is because you've seen it or personally experienced it and you feel it is an important issue, or you're kind of talking to us because you know it's an important issue to us? So maybe could people on this call raise their hand if they've seen it or experienced it themselves? I can't see the hands. Let's see, gallery view. So
if you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to share a little bit more.
So one person said, isn't there a place where you can just raise your hand?
Yes, we've had 4 participants raise their hands.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a pressing issue for everyone on the call. Yeah, I think that because I personally would answer this question differently. Like, if you're passionate about if you've seen it, you've experienced it, if you care, if you have a daughter, you care about what's going to be like for your daughter, or you yourself would like to offer service and feel like it's not a possibility, that's a kind of different answer than if you don't even see the problem. But for me, I feel that we need to expand our culture of respect. For, intrinsic in Indian culture is a respect for the sannyasi. and the renunciate, and the importance of the knowledge that they bring to everyone in the society, the spiritual knowledge and the example of seriously practicing the spiritual path. So it's normal that we have this culture of respect for the sannyasi, but it's been, in my experience, at the expense of respecting everyone. And it's also my experience that in the marginalization of women in ISKCON, this has also led to the abuse of our children. And I feel it's very important, even if we haven't personally experienced a problem with the inclusivity of women in ISKCON, that it should be on our radar how it's affecting our family structure and what it means going forward for us. Just some opening words, and maybe I would have more, but I'd like to hear from Radha and Kusha.
Yeah, I would like to respond to this question. First of all, I think what Pranada Prabhu said is absolutely right, and Shyamala Kishori, you know, we have to make ISKCON a space where everyone is respected and everyone has access. But I also note that negative perceptions of women are prevalent in every institution. You know, every institution in this world struggles with racism and sexism. The other thing is that our Varnashram Dharma culture has a kind of hierarchical aspect to it. You know, elders are supposed to get respect, and dasis, nuns are supposed to get respect. And when you have hierarchy without spiritual understanding, you get oppression, right? So we bring our biases, we bring our false ego into this wonderful Krishna consciousness, and sometimes we just get it wrong because of our material conditioning. To kind of springboard off what Pranada Prabhu said, in, you know, traditional cultures, mothers are valued, mothers are respected, right? So in ISKCON, somehow we've grabbed on to part of that traditional culture, but we've left respect for mothers by the wayside.
Thank you so much.
I would like to add something. In the four Vaishnava lineages, our lineage has been traditionally, before Srila Prabhupada came to America, it had been often a brahmachari sannyasi culture. Although I did hear recently that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had a woman's ashram. So that was really enlivening to hear that, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he changed a lot of things. He changed the fact that they could use like the typewriter and machinery, like Nimbarka Sampradaya, which is Sri Sampradaya. They don't traditionally use anything. They don't even use a light bulb. I've been to one of their kirtans at Tatyastan by the Jamuna, and they don't use anything mechanical. So, and they keep the women really separate, really, really separate. But our lineage, because it's been traditionally, but with adjustments by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, very much a brahmachari sannyasi lineage, we're laboring under some historic growing pains as far as the traditions are concerned. If you look at, like, say, Pushti Marg, who they basically are a householder lineage, and they are very much, the women are very much the keeper of the faith, because they're doing the daily seva in the actual home. And it is a family kind of tradition. But because ours was preaching and the women were less, the women traditionally in India didn't go out as much. They didn't, I mean, if you go, I lived in India now, Vrindavan, 18 years. If so many of the wives of the husbands in our Gaudiya Sampradaya, our temple, don't come to the temple because they're home doing home things, and that's what the husbands want. And so what we're doing in our movement is we're laboring under some ancient paradigms that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati has been adjusting. And part of it is because it's a preaching movement, and it isn't like something that is being passed down in the family as much. That concept of preaching, in a sense, it's like, are we disposable? No, we're not disposable. So we've got some things that we have to understand and kind of diagnose as problems within our society and traditions that may have warranted what is going on historically here. And in being understanding, we have to be tolerant and perseverant and determined to make the adjustments necessary for equality, spiritual equality. Any other ideas?
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
I'd like to address that too. The two different parts I would like to respond to. So first, that statement where you write, it can be difficult to see our beautiful philosophy misapplied. I've noticed in my own experience, especially when I was in undergrad, that I was hesitant sometimes to bring people to the temple or to even introduce them to Krishna conscious culture because of that discrepancy. And I feel like that's a really important point, that hopefully one day we can be a society where there isn't that discrepancy. In terms of the question, I wanted to share a little bit about my upbringing because I feel like it comments on the perceptions that were ingrained into me growing up in Krishna consciousness. I went to devotee school and I lived in a devotee community, quite sheltered life. So like I mentioned, I had a mixed experience growing up. I was very encouraged by many people, and I lived in a small community, so I got opportunities that women in other places didn't get, such as leading kirtan, playing mridanga. And that I'm very, very grateful for. At the same time, when I hit puberty, which is a very difficult time, a vulnerable time, the messages about women and girls being almost like temptresses for men really impacted me, really in a really negative way, feeling a lot of shame about myself, my body, as it changed, and feeling, this feeling really bad about having a female body, which has stayed. I mean, it's something that I think once it's inside of you, it's very hard to get past. It takes a lot of work to get over that shame, and it can impact you on so many levels, materially and spiritually. And then the same with the mind. So shame about the things you hear, like Gurukul boys laughing at us because we're less intelligent. And there was nothing we could say to argue them, because if you try to speak up, then they go, oh yeah, you're just sentimental woman. So, it's kind of like those things that become deeply ingrained in the psyche of, I think, the young girls who grew up in Krishna consciousness movement, if they hear those kinds of things. Hopefully it's less now, but it definitely impacted me in the way that the less intelligent part, especially feeling inadequate, feeling an inadequacy in speaking up, using my voice for Krishna. And that has been something I've also been fighting against for many, many years. So these things can last and really impact us for many years if they're not handled correctly, if the quotes are thrown around and like that. So.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. We really appreciate that. Building off of what you all had said, I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on chastity versus confidence. Often we see them as one can't exist if the other is there. If you're chaste, you can't be confident. So I wondered if you could talk about them as actually non-contradictory qualities, and how, as women, we can have both things together, and how what is real chastity, and what is the beauty of chastity? What does it mean to be chaste? What does it mean to be confident?
I'll start.
Go ahead, Radha.
I'm sorry. chastity means having good boundaries. You know, it has nothing to do with whether or not you get attention. We confuse chastity with meaning I will not be seen, right? But that's not what it means. It means I'm not going to allow people to exploit me for their sense gratification. So to be confident is, I think, every woman's right. Every Vaishnavi is right. We are part and parcel of Lord Sri Krishna. We are valued by the Supreme Person, you know. So yes, be confident, because we each have something special to offer, something that Krishna values. It doesn't mean that we will hide. You know, that's a misconception.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think what I've kind of taken away when I hear chastity and ISKCON has to do with, you know, be quiet and hide. And that's not the definition of chastity. Chastity means being not promiscuous sexually. It means being loyal to your husband. It has a very clear definition that's not clear in ISKCON, actually. So I think Radha was right in how she brought that up. And but the way it's used in ISKCON is it's used to control and to kill confidence. And it is, as Shyamala Kishori was just saying, I agree. I have like this lifelong impressions that you just don't get over. For me to speak in public is a major trauma. I have to go through a lot to speak and not think about what people are thinking and what they're going to say, and now they're going to criticize me for being unchaste and not shy and not humble. And this isn't what's happening. What's happening is we are meant to use all of our senses in Krishna's service. That includes our mind and intelligence. And I don't know about you, but I see the young women on this call tonight are extremely intelligent young women. And all of you, you know, in order for a lifetime of devotion, you are meant to engage everything that you have in Krishna's service. And that means with confidence we have to. Sometimes we're going to take up big challenges, and it requires some courage even.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
I would like to discuss the word enthusiasm, which I think really supports confidence. And the word enthusiasm comes from entheos, with God. And when we are with Krishna, when we are fully identifying with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that He is ours and we are His, that's real chastity. We have to be unflinching, achala. We have to be so unflinching in our devotion to Krishna. We will not allow anything less than Krishna consciousness. We will not be abused by anything. There's no such thing as unchastity when we are chaste to Krishna. When we're chaste in our consciousness, we are enthusiastic, we're confident, and we're ready to share the joy of Krishna consciousness with everyone. This is our right and our responsibility to share joy, to share Krishna consciousness, to glorify Krishna. There's nothing unchaste about that. And we have to be enthusiastic to share. We're preachers. It's all about sharing love. Love, real love. How can we divide chastity and love? Love of Krishna is so pure.
You know, this one point you just said, Kusha, is important, because as I was reading, anyway, I don't remember where I was reading, but it's described how the gopis are chaste to Krishna. And that what is described in that, in the use of the word there, is that they are completely have given their full self to Krishna without diverting their attention anywhere else. And that is real chastity.
I love that point that you were both making at the end there. I experienced in my own, again, going back to my childhood, there were many times where I had to fight very hard against the temptation to just stay quiet or to not do a service because of this struggle, this battle. For example, I really enjoyed playing mridanga, and that was a service I did a lot in my temple, but the mridangas, of course, were always on the men's side of the room. So in order to, like, if somebody wanted me to play for the kirtan, I would have to walk all the way around behind everyone. And it felt just so presumptuous. It felt like I had, it felt almost arrogant to like walk across and march and go grab it, you know, and it was such a battle inside because, oh, I want to be humble. I don't want to put myself forward. At the same time, I know that I can play better than the men that were there. So I had to go against this kind of struggle about whether I should put myself forward and just think, okay, what would please Krishna and what would please the devotees? And that's I think that's the essence of chastity to Krishna. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we've spoken about chastity for a woman, but I'd like to sort of flip it over and discuss what is real protection. We often read that women need to be protected and cared for, but and they need to be chaste. But can we discuss a little bit, what does that protection mean? Does anybody have anything they'd like to share specifically about that?
I do, because I've thought a lot about this. You have to think about what is the goal of protecting women. The goal of protecting women is to create a society that is conducive to consciousness, where everyone becomes Krishna conscious. So any kind of protection that doesn't lead to becoming Krishna conscious is not the right kind of protection. So ultimately, protection means to give everyone, but especially in this context we're talking about Vaishnavis, full facility to use their talents and inclinations in Krishna's service. Then we are protected. I read a science fiction story once about a woman whose husband died and she went a little mad. And she put her children in their bedrooms and bricked up the doorways so that nothing could hurt them. And of course, they died. And sometimes it seems to me that in ISKCON, that's the kind of protection we're giving women. You know, we'll brick you up in a room by yourself and no one will ever touch you. You'll be chaste, but you won't be Krishna conscious.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful point and great analogy to make it clear to us.
I could also add that it seems, in my observation, that generally we think a man should protect a woman. And what are they protecting her from? It's from praying men. This is the idea, right? But I've also seen that women need more protection than that, in the sense that sometimes men don't know how to give that protection, and only women can give that protection to another woman. And by that I mean that women need to have community. We are the nurturers and the caregivers. We are the mothers of the families. We are the glue of the community. And in order to give that care, we also need personal care, and we need to discuss about how to give that care and how to navigate complex relational issues and what to do as we're raising children. And that really comes from our God sisters. So I would say that part of protection for women is to have strong community amongst women, which means a safe place to share without judgment and in confidence. And I think it's really important early on in our lives, both as people and devotees, to have groups of women that we can turn to and rely on. And I know that in Alatra, this first generation women have many groups, and I've been hearing second generation women also. So I would just say protection is also very important to come from our sisters.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful.
Hare Krishna. I think I agree with everything everyone has been saying. And protection for me, it also means allowing each and every one of us to blossom to our full potential, to blossom whatever our nature is, whatever we may be good at. Sometimes it might be something like singing, dancing, things that are very demonstrative. And it seems as though some ladies, as soon as they get married, they quit dancing. You know, they're trained dancers, and all of a sudden, bam, they don't dance anymore. But to really blossom to the fullest potential, to be safe and nurtured and encouraged to offer everything to Krishna. Like in the dance, I once was watching Deva Dihiti. She had choreographed this beautiful dancing Guru Puja in New Dwarka. It was absolutely exquisite. And if any of us have ever had the experience of being so absorbed in an art that you just throw yourself into it, just like every ounce of your being, it's an offering to Krishna. Whatever you're doing it as a full offering to Krishna. To be allowed to do that in whatever way, that if it's making the garlands, to have that beautiful creativity, to be facilitated, to be able to do what you do for Krishna in such a way that you really offer yourself to Krishna in that whatever your experience is. That's real protection.
Thank you.
I was going to say something similar. I was thinking about that Bhagavad Gita verse 335, where Krishna says that it's better to perform your own duty than another's, your own dharma, as opposed to trying to do someone else's. And real protection is when we allow people to blossom, like Kusha Prabhu was saying, and in really performing their dharma. And that might look different for different people. That might be being a homemaker and taking care of children, or it might be leading a center and giving classes. And depending on the individual's nature, it's going to be very different. Instead of lumping women into a category and assuming that we're all going to be the same. So I think that's important. I also wanted to just add on to the chastity question, that sometimes I feel like the word chastity is just linked with women, but I feel like it's important to also mention that everyone should practice chastity, because if it's only put on women, then it becomes like the responsibility is on us to keep, society pure and everything. But I think that men also need to take that onus and really act responsibly in that way too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer.
Could I ask a question related to that comment, Shyamala, I guess to the whole panel? So a lot of it coming from a perspective of a woman is that how you've felt, heard or felt unheard, or even worse, felt really put down or oppressed by men in the past in our society. And I think as younger men who are listening to this or who are watching, what advice would you give to us so that that doesn't happen in the future, or that we can support women better?
I guess I'll start since, one thing would be, I think that question itself is really powerful and really helpful. And what comes to mind is being willing to listen and really wanting to hear another person's experience, really trying to, although we can never fully put ourselves in someone else's shoes, I think the effort of trying to do that and empathizing with someone else's experience that will make a huge contribution to not just to how the other person feels, but also to the whole movement in general, to really understand what what it's like having different kinds of bodies. And this is not just for gender, but also for different cultural backgrounds, different races, all that, to really take time to hear someone and empathize with their story. And that includes really understanding and learning about what the first generation of women went through in ISKCON, you know, because I feel like that history is lost a lot and it's almost like swept under the carpet sometimes. But I feel like to really honor what the struggles they went through is to also learn their history and really hear from them and ask. And yeah.
I'd like to address chastity to the fact that we're spirit. If we continuously bring ourselves back to the fact that we are spirit, and we even remind, if someone is trying to distract us, to call us something more than spirit soul, you know, something, or less than, you know, less than, that's their problem. And for us, we can be forgiving, like forgive them, for they know not what they do. But by the way, we are spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna, and we just carry on. We just carry on in spite of, I know when I was a new devotee, and we were going through all these things, I just sort of played with it. It didn't bother me at all, because it, you know, when I was growing up, there was a period in our immature life where they had cootie queens, and I was the cootie queen in the Amazonian in the neighborhood, you know, and who cares? You know, like they wanted, and you know, if you touched a guy, they had to get a cootie booster. Well, that was their problem. And so I had fun with it. And you like, yeah, you know, I'm the boogeyman, whatever, you know. But once I had a daughter, because it didn't bother me, I then put myself into her shoes. You probably know my daughter, Nitya Leela. She lives in Hillsborough. I would not let anything come past her ears that made her less of a human being. If somebody's at my door. Hare Krishna, I'm going to get it and I'll be right back.
I'd like to share something that maybe addresses this point of how Vaishnavas can support Vaishnavis. I joined in the late 80s, and in my community, the Vaishnavis stood in the back of the temple. And our deities here in San Diego are tiny. You know, so if you're standing in the back of the temple, you don't necessarily get the chance to see Krishna, you know, to see his face. It's just kind of a blur. So at one point, the temple authorities somehow decided to go back to the side-by-side. So for the first time, I went to Mangala Arati and I could see Krishna's face. And it was such a powerful experience, I can't even explain it. Then later that day, some of the men were talking about how they didn't like this change and they wanted it to go back to what it was. And I just spontaneously burst into tears. You know, I mean, I'm not even sure why I was crying, but I was crying. And one of the brahmacharis, a senior devotee, you know, he was really affected by that because it brought home to him that this wasn't just a detail who stands where it really impacted my heart. And, you know, I don't know how the decision was maintained, but it was maintained and there was no more talk about us standing in the back again. But, you know, each Vaishnava has the opportunity to advocate and support the Vaishnavis. We can't fully take our place in ISKCON society. The Vaishnavas don't support us.
I really appreciate that, because there is the story about the lady who climbed up on Lord Chaitanya's head, and she was so enthusiastic to see the deity. He didn't mind at all. So if we're concentrating on darshan of Krishna, if we're so fired up that nobody can stop us, you know, it's like, this is the way to go. I had a story here in ISKCON, Hawaii, where the GBC wanted an all-man standard for the Pujari Seva, and I was Jagannath Pujari, big Jagannath Pujari, and I was crying every morning. I'd chant japa before I would go in and take care of the deities after Mangalartik, and they decided that they didn't want any women on the altar. That was it, new rules. And that was devastating to me because I was a Pujari. And so I was training up a new Pujari, and then it was the very last day that I was going to be allowed to go in. And all the men were in the Pujari room chuckling. And I was going out. I was never going to get to go on again. And just like you, I burst into tears, and I ran into the blackness of the backyard where they couldn't see me. And 2 weeks later, they made a petition with before and after pictures, and I was back on the altar. Hare Krishna.
I just want to underscore what Radha said about Vaishnavas advocating for women, and it ties into also Shyamala Kishori's statement to hear and to know. When you don't know where you can advocate. So being open to hear, and then standing up and saying, don't be silent. I don't think the women should be silent, and I would be so grateful also if the men were not silent. The men should be protecting their wives and their daughters and their sisters, because there has been dialogue from the women toward the leadership and our brothers for decades, but it's really different when the men stand up and say, this isn't okay and we need to change it, because really it is affecting the devotional heart of everyone. It's not just a matter of, oh, the women don't feel respected and they want more or something like this. Actually, when we are blocking any soul's service to Krishna, this is an offense. It's an aparad. And even if we're not knowingly committing the aparad, we're just part of a system that perpetrates that, it's affecting our own progress in Krishna consciousness. So it's something to take really seriously. I mean, I was so impressed. I think the name of the devotee was Ram Govinda, that he even asked that question. It was very touching and moving, because if more people had a heart and feeling like that, we wouldn't see the kind of subtle behaviors and moods and views toward women. And here, say in Alachua or certain places in North America, we may not experience it very much, but I hear it from hundreds of women all over the world, and I'm sure Radha will. She's on the ground more active than I am. It's just phenomenal, the extent of the subtle oppression and marginalization of women and how it's breaking hearts, and it's not good for anyone's bhakti, the men or the women, that this kind of offenses are going on. This is aparad, and aparads, you're sinful. The sins of the flesh are not really a problem in bhakti, because the holy name is so powerful. It will take care of these material desires and habits, but the blocking of bhakti, that is not easily overcome. It can really prolong our attempt to go toward Krishna. So I just want to say that what I see is actually offense to women in many cases, in some cases. And so just being aware and asking that question and being willing to hear and to speak up, just have a little courage to say, hey, it's not right. I'll give you one example. Like one of my god sisters, very senior, she went to Mayapur after some years, and she was so happy to see Lord Nrsingadev. She stood in front of his altar waiting for the arti to happen. And as is customary, she stood there, and one after another, a man stepped in front of her, the next man, the next, until she was very far away from Lord Nrsimhadev's altar. Now, she is old enough to be all these men who stood in front of her mother, and she had personal association with Srila Prabhupada. That's fine, even if you don't know that, still, you know, why are you just like disrespecting the senior Vaishnavi? But even, okay, that was one thing. Then the man walked around with the ghee lamp, and he was walking around and handed it to everyone, and he handed it to her, and she put out her hand, and as soon as he saw it was a woman, he yanked the ghee lamp away and walked the other way. It's like, what is the mentality that underlies this? This is not Vaishnava mentality, and it's not helpful. Not only she was like really on the ground, just like devastated, and but what is the mentality of the men that are doing this and continue it?
And could I add one more thing to this? Yeah. So this question has so many thoughts are coming up for me, but one thing I was thinking about is if that could be very supportive is if devotee men don't leave when a devotee woman is speaking, giving class. For example, this happens a lot in India. I've noticed this. There'll be like one day a week where a Vaishnavi is giving a lecture, and that day is sparse, and the audience is, you know, like mostly women, and most of the men are gone. So that's one way to, just a practical, maybe more subtle way to support is to stay in the kirtan, stay in the classes that the women are giving. And then also noticing, not being, especially for, I feel for brahmacharis and celibate people, that they might be afraid to be aware of where the women are because they don't want to, you know, there's this fear of like, oh, I'm not going to look, I'm not going to, you know. And the problem with that kind of attitude is then you don't notice, you become kind of oblivious to, especially in India, again, I've noticed this a lot, where all the women will be kind of pushed to the sitting on the edge of the class, like all the way, you know, kind of, because I think what happens is the men are afraid to even acknowledge their existence and to notice where they are. So finding a way to acknowledge the existence of souls in women's bodies and not make them feel invisible, you know, like to support them that way.
One of the things that I was doing in Vrindavan is like for the boat festivals and certain festivals, from a management perspective, I would cordon off an area for the ladies, you know, that because they had a corded area for the Maharajas. Actually, we ended up having better facility because we took responsibility for ourselves. I was feeling bad for the Maharajas because we just managed ourselves nicely. So we need to step up from a management perspective, and we need to facilitate. You know, I was giving special bracelets, and we were telling them to come in through a certain door so that they had a first-class place that was safe, no pushing, no shoving, to be at. So as managers, we do need to ask for facility, safe facility for the ladies. We need to actually make arrangements.
Thank you for all these answers. Now that you're speaking about them, I just realizing that the point about staying in class when a woman speaks, something I never noticed. I never noticed that mass exodus of people going out, but now that you mention it, it comes to attention that I have been in classes where that's happened, and it just never caught my attention until now. So thank you for all your answers.
One of the things I'd like to say is Pradyumna, who's known as Panditji, he told me that the best class givers of Bhagavad Gita that he had ever heard were women, and he named them. There are some devotees in Vrindavan. And the fellow who won the international Bhagavad Gita competition at the age of 21 gave credit to two Western, one French and one American teacher, women. And the whole audience of that international program, they went, like it was like, and this was in India. It was the prime minister gave him a big gold medal, and he gave credit to Srila Prabhupada and these two Western Matajis for teaching him.
Thank you. On this topic of advocacy and support for women for both ourselves and for men, I wanted to talk about feminism, which has kind of become a derogatory word within ISKCON. And I wanted to direct this question first to you, Radha Dasi. What do you think is true feminism, and how do we understand feminism from a Krishna conscious perspective?
Yeah, feminism is a term that has been politicized both in secular society and especially in ISKCON. If you want to discredit a woman, you simply say she's a feminist. So many of us have been called feminists. And I have friends, colleagues from work who are actual feminists, and they laugh, they scoff at the idea that any ISKCON devotee could actually be a feminist. But there are two ways to define the term. One is to a movement that seeks to value the feminine. And the other is a movement that seeks rights for women based on the idea of equality. Srila Prabhupada was not impressed with that second definition. And I will be honest, I see that the Western feminist movement has largely failed women because it has been solely focused on that definition. What I mean by that is that Western feminism has focused on opening up male spaces for women's participation. What it has failed to do is to value women's spaces. So you have equal opportunity to be a man, right? Most of us don't want to be men. When I was a young lawyer, I was also a young mother, and I very well remember one particular performance review where I was told that the partners had a problem with me because I valued my family more than my job. And what could I say? It was absolutely true. I need to realize that society generally values what is traditionally male work. We see this in the current coronavirus pandemic experience. Childcare has become such a turning point. A good chunk of our labor force needs to have childcare. Well, again, because we have failed to value women's contributions, we have put ourselves in a place where good childcare is hard to find. We don't value it. Anyway, I'm getting on a soapbox and I need to calm down. But that is something that ISKCON is uniquely poised to address, is this need to value feminine spaces.
I would like to say that Srila Prabhupada, I did so much, Pujari Seva, book distribution, so many things. But the one thing that I did that really got Srila Prabhupada's attention and approval was be a very good mother. He loved you could completely trust my son. He would give him a garland every day. Prabhupada gave him one of his garlands. He sprinkled his wash water on my son's head. I got so much satisfaction and reciprocation in my relationship with Srila Prabhupada based on motherhood. Motherhood. He acknowledged that. He treated the children so specially. And I mean, I don't want to say all the other services weren't as important. Of course, they're all important. But the satisfaction that I got in that relationship with Srila Prabhupada by offering my child to him was over and over again. It was amazing. So motherhood, contributing good Vaishnava children to our society, there is nothing more important to do than be a Krishna conscious parent. Hare Krishna.
I was thinking how, I think she, you know, one of Prabhupada's, you know, he did not look at feminism favorably, and it was because it was destroying the family units. In his view, you had women trying to become men and take men's spaces, and not recognizing that there actually is a difference between the sexes, and a woman's participation in the society as a mother and as a caregiver was crucial. Which, it's interesting because the same thing that Prabhupada was opposed to with feminism, that he appreciated motherhood and he valued the family, he recognized the importance of the family. That's almost like the very thing that, or part of the very thing that ISKCON as a generalization has not appreciated by putting so much emphasis on renunciation, and therefore anything, a woman or anything associated with the woman, like a man that's married to her or the children, they're seen as less than, not only less important, but, you know, just, yeah, I mean, we were disrespected. I think it's much better now. But yeah, isn't that an interesting observation, how what Prabhupada was opposed to in feminism is, and that's a glory that he appreciated, and then we haven't really given it full appreciation and respect as a society.
Thank you so much. Shyamala Kishori, do you have anything to add? Okay.
I would like to say something.
Absolutely.
Because in the beginning of Govinda Dasi, she tells me how Srila Prabhupada was very much studying our society in the early days. And he was noticing how women were trained to do everything that men were trained to do. They could swim, they could drive, they could operate different kinds of machinery. There was nothing a woman couldn't do. And he was making a note of it. He was studying our society and seeing how Krishna consciousness could be applied within the traditions of our basic Western society. He wasn't, there's absolute truth, there's that which is essential to Krishna consciousness, and then there's the circumstances around it. And Srila Prabhupada was very expert at the time, place, and circumstance and making adjustments. I not necessarily, his female disciples, I mean, we had like Shalavati was head pujari, she was in charge of deity worship. So many very powerful ladies in the early days in Krishna consciousness, even Jamuna and Govinda Dasi, where they were sharing a post on the GBC. But Govinda Dasi, she said, I was much more interested in what I could do to take care of Srila Prabhupada. That they had more of the nurturing, and they made Srila Prabhupada's life really beautiful and wonderful, clean, with fresh flowers and good food and a healthy life. And Prabhupada said, if you serve these women, you will go back to Krishna. You will go back to Godhead.
Hi, thank you so much. So I want to ask next, as the next generation, what steps can we take to improve opportunities for Vaishnavis, and how can we make this change systemically? All of you have worked very hard to create opportunities and access. And so what advice do you have for us to continue making that change? So hopefully it's something that we don't have to keep working at, as something that's established and part of our society. Mother Pranada, do you have anything to share?
There's a lot to share. I'm not sure. I think I'd let Radha go first as the minister.
On the theory that fools rush in where wise men fear to tread. one thing is everybody needs to have a voice in decision making, right? And the feminine voice has been excluded. Part of what we need is more Vaishnavis to be involved in determining how our society develops. And that means we have to both provide the opportunity, but it also means that Vaishnavis have to make some sacrifices and step up into this role. So, you know, we can encourage each other, we can each, you know, take a turn in the trenches, but that's really important, not just for Vaishnavis, but for the whole society. And I really like what Shyamala Kishori said about keeping each other, because part of our problem in ISKCON is that we're awfully impersonal. We don't get to know each other. We don't have loving exchanges on the basis of the heart. And if we truly build our relationships so we're hearing from others and they're hearing from us, then we're naturally going to be able to facilitate each devotee. The fact is that, I can't remember who said it now, but this idea that that all women are the same, you know, it's that impersonalism. And the idea that there's only one way to be a devotee, you know, whether that's as a renunciant or however we think a devotee is supposed to appear. But if we get to know each other and really understand each other, then we can more easily see, how does this person become Krishna conscious? What does this person have to offer to Srila Prabhupada?
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. We actually can't, oh, your camera came back on. Okay, we were able to see it.
I was so enthusiastic, I turned my camera off.
I think also, you know, making change is on a global level is one thing, and making change at home is also really powerful. And it's the grassroots change that can actually spread. When we see examples and we see courage of individuals, then we're inspired perhaps to take it up ourselves. So I would say, first of all, don't buy into the limitations others place on you or what your mind places on you. Prabhupada, he encouraged everyone, his male and female disciples, to take on more and more responsibilities. And at very young ages, teenagers, early 20s, we were being sent to remote places of the world without any association to do things. And so, not that you're being called on to do that, but to be courageous, to really go beyond your comfort zones for preaching. And yes, many of us will have families, and raising families, that takes a lot of time. It requires resources, so it means having a career to make money, and then raising children is also requires a lot of time. But find a service that is in addition to your family, that can keep your heart inspired in Krishna consciousness for preaching. We are a preaching movement. Prabhupada had deep compassion for all souls. And we see the extent that he went to reach us, to reach everyone. So in our little ways, we need to continue that. And I think the other way to make change and change the situation for Vaishnavis is to ask your husbands to support you and to speak up and go public and not be shy about it. So many men are just afraid to say anything because they're going to be labeled and they're going to be seen as, you know, like, oh, you're with the women, you know, how come you're so weak that you're with the women? Actually, it's a sign of courage to change, to make proper and good change. So I would say, ask for your husband's help, and for husbands, please respond to that. And the other thing is, speak with your spiritual fathers, your spiritual masters. they love you. And I think you can have a lot more influence with them than we had necessarily, because they do love you dearly. And by hearing from you, I think that they can see things that they didn't see in other ways. Like, if don't be shy to say what your experience is on a subtle or a gross level as a woman navigating the situation in the institution, and ask them for help to change that, because they're the ones that are training devotees, and especially men. And to change a worldview, to change a perception, it requires not only modeling the behavior, but training and not allowing certain behaviors to go on. And I think that if you as their female disciples aren't shy, and humbly, obviously, and with some knowledge, but just say, we need this facility, and I'm seeing my sisters here and here affected, and please help us.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to add to this question? You're still on mute.
Yes, there we go. I don't want to say anything negative, but there will always be immature fellows, and they will. I mean, I encountered it in Vrindavan. The 40-year-olds, my son's age, opposed me when I got clearance for the ladies to finally chant. We had a 45th year reunion of the grand opening of Krishna Balaram Mandir, and we did 24-hour kirtan. The ladies had their slot for the first time in 30 years, but the young men opposed it. They actually rallied against our situation, and I dug my heels in, and I wouldn't allow them to bully me. I absolutely stood my ground. And we have to be confident. There's thousands of women that we're standing up for, thousands. If 18 young men are trying to bully someone into not having kirtan, not being able to chant in front of the deities, that's 18 young men. We have to stand up for the thousands of young women who will be coming to chant for the rest of eternity. So we have to be confident that we're doing, this is what Srila Prabhupada wanted. He organized the women to be part of the 24-hour kirtan. He was the one who brought Arundhati, Sitala. They were there to even sing during that festival. And Prabhupada brought them to be part of it during his time. We have to be confident that we are doing Srila Prabhupada's will to serve Krishna. So important. And if these young men, and there will be young men, we just go, okay, they're at that phase of life and they're trying to be good devotees. We forgive them, but we're not gonna give up. We can forgive them and just forge ahead in our service. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much.
Harizal. So I've been thinking about this a lot. Pranada Prabhu had asked me to write an article for the anthology that was released, Emergence of Women's Voices in ISKCON. So I was reflecting on this over summer, like how what are things that we can do to improve, and what my vision for the future of ISKCON would be. And so some of the things I wanted to share, first of all, we don't have that much time left with Prabhupada's original female disciples and older Vaishnavis. So really valuing the wisdom they have to share in the time, like really taking advantage of them while they're still with us. And then, as we kind of touched on earlier, not overlooking devotees who are not in those prominent positions, like externally, they're not sannyasis, they're not leaders necessarily, really going out of our way to just notice the wonderful devotees that are around us, that are not necessarily in those authority positions, and that many of the Vaishnavis fall into that category because they don't take sannyas and so on. So to really, really appreciate and value them. And then another thing that I would really love to see more of in the future with our generation is to see us speaking more, giving class, lectures, talking about Krishna more, because every single devotee has something to share about Krishna that they have realized in their lives. And I feel like a lot of this thing about maybe a little bit of inferiority or shyness or fear to put ourselves forward because it's going to look, I don't know, not feminine or whatever, gets in the way of really utilizing what we have to share about Krishna in our lives while we're alive. You know, we don't know how long we have, but to really take those opportunities and to not be so afraid of making a mistake. Because the thing is that growing up, I was fortunate. I had some examples of women in my community who gave wonderful classes, but because the first generation of women, a lot of them weren't encouraged to give classes, a lot of us in the second and third generations don't have those role models. And therefore, we really need to, it takes some courage actually to speak when you're not used to it, or it can be very scary. But just practicing and finding little sanghas maybe where we can practice, where we can start with our peers and giving classes and talking about Krishna and facilitating discussions. And I feel like as that happens, the respect for Vaishnavis in general will increase, because as our movement has more and more speakers, Vaishnavi speakers talking about Krishna, then their respectability will increase. And then also just some small things that I have noticed growing up that I would love to see thought about and maybe changed in temple situations is having instruments on both sides of the room, so that people who are motivated to engage in kirtan can easily access them, because like I mentioned, I had to walk all the way around every time. And so it's just a small thing, but it makes a big difference. And encouraging, since many of the second and third generation devotees are having daughters, I hope to see more female mridanga players in the future. That's something I personally would love to see. And when we're giving classes and discussions, when we speak about devotees, to sometimes use the feminine pronoun, because I think what happens is most of the time the generic devotee is he. So for example, as he progresses in spiritual life, he becomes, like that. And to once in a while throw in she, and you'll realize how strange it sounds. And it's because we're so unfamiliar with saying that. And I was reflecting on this, and I think it actually makes a difference because when you're growing up and you never hear she used with description of Vaishnava and a devotee and their journey and their improvement spiritually, it kind of always feels like it's something outside of yourself, like it's the men that are the devotees, and it's subtle, but I think it's important. Another thing is just during the morning program in general, I think in order to attract more people, especially younger people, to Krishna consciousness, to be aware of where there seems to be kind of like just making a more egalitarian morning program. And this happens really well at Krishna House in Gainesville, where I've been associated with for many years. For example, like just the morning verse singing, instead of having like devotees and then ladies, that thing that kind of makes the ladies feel like their bodies, and second, but just having devotees take turns, like, different, whoever wants to sing the verse can sing it. And then also when receiving the maha from the arti is just to, that either devotees take turns or they go across the room like they do at Krishna House, but so that in big festivals, the women don't end up with just the smoke of the ghee lamp, for instance, which is a very common experience. And I don't think many men realize that's what happens. So these are just small, like maybe details, but I think if the details are thought about and become more significant in discussions, that will be reflecting our respect and our appreciation for everyone, you know? So even though they're small things, they do impact. Like, for example, when I was living at Krishna House, I had a roommate who was a new devotee. She's brand new. And she asked me a lot of questions about women in ISKCON. And it was the small things that she brought to my attention, because it's the small things that reflect a culture of lack of respect or of indifference, invisibility, all those things. So just if these things can be discussed and, you know, those kinds of things. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful, beautiful illuminations that we need to apply. I'd like to open it up now to everyone with us. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask to specific speakers, please feel free to unmute yourself or send it right here in the chat. We'd love to hear from you if there was anything that you wanted to ask.
I wanted to ask about a few of the points that kind of connected in regard to appreciating the feminine qualities. And I was thinking about my time in Gurukul, and also thinking about, I was in the Brahmachari ashram for 5 years, and I couldn't remember a time where that was a part of our education, was understanding and appreciating Vaishnavis. And it sounds a little bit unfortunate, but that's really was the case. And to Shyamala Kishori's point about how the brahmacharis were seemed like they were afraid to acknowledge women, and I definitely experienced that, is that there is so little education in that regard that you don't know what to do. And I was thinking about going forward in the future for those of us who will be the fathers of the next generation as householders. What do you think is the best way for men to develop that appreciation of feminine qualities, and particularly in our children as well? Of course, many of us do have daughters, and for those of us who will have sons, it seems like that's be a very, very significant part of their education, particularly because the feminine qualities are always associated with devotion, actually, in our scriptures. And I was thinking of how bhakti and humility and compassion, all of these are actually inherently feminine qualities. There's a very beautiful drama called Chaitanya Chandrodaya Natika, written by one of Mahaprabhu's associates. And all of the qualities are played out by an actor. And he writes all the roles in the beginning. And almost all of them are female roles. So I just thought from that perspective, it's so important for men to understand the significance of those qualities, not only in our lives, but in our society. I was just wondering if you could speak on that.
Yeah, I'm always willing to open my mouth. That's a really wonderful question. I think sometimes we forget that these stereotyped roles hurt Vaishnavas also. You know, we are told you can't participate in this particular sphere, but Vaishnavas are told you can't feel these different emotions. You can't express these certain qualities. So understanding that we are each individuals, you know, and that we all have talents, inclinations, feelings, and we shouldn't stereotype them. But I also think that as fathers, just like for me at my age, it is so much easier to deal with men simply because I'm like a grandmother. You know, I think also, you know, for fathers who are trying to help Vaishnavis or trying to become sensitive to that, there's a certain age that you need to reach before you really take on that role. And it comes back to this idea that everyone's valuable and everyone is worthy of respect. I don't remember, it might have been Sudharma who led an exercise once where she asked the group to close their eyes and imagine that all the Vaishnavis left you know, and what the society would be like, what services would be left undone. You know, we don't take time to appreciate each other, you know. And that's something that as Vaishnavis, we can start that. This doesn't require, you know, an authority to approve it or, you know, someone to endorse it. You know, we can start these conversations in our communities. And when couples speak up, you know, that's very powerful. Husband and wife teams. Those are the teams Srila Prabhupada built ISKCON on. You know, so all of that can be part of, you know, our attempt to change the perception of Vaishnavis.
It's a powerful something that you notice, Ananta Gauranga, how these qualities are feminine, and while we can't say every woman demonstrates them, as a generalization, women tend to be on the softer side and naturally happy to be submissive and serving, and by that they accept their like humble position. It's really for most women it's really quite fine. And so by seeing this their natural tendencies, I think we can also say that we want, as all Vaishnavas, we want to develop these feminine qualities. They're important in the culture of bhakti. And I remember my god sister Gauri, before she passed away, it was in mid 80s or maybe 86, 87, something like that. She was in Vrindavan getting ready to pass away. She had cancer. And I was very much up in arms about what was happening for women in ISKCON. And things weren't actually so subtle. There was quite serious abuse situations going on, and I was very much disturbed by it and wanting to do something about it. And I went to Gauri like, what are we going to do, Gauri? What are we going to do? And she just looked at me and she said, you know, Pranada, I'm so glad I'm a woman in ISKCON. She said, I look around at my god brothers, and they've been like jostling for position and power and this and that. And I would have done the exact same thing if I had been born as a man. And I feel like Krishna protected me from that and allowed me to really develop some humility and just focus on my service. So these feminine qualities, they can really propel us forward in Krishna consciousness. And so to value them, to recognize them, appreciate them, and then to even embrace them in our lives is very important. And to respect the people that are modeling those characteristics is also favorable for our cultivation of bhakti.
Hare Krishna. I also was remembering Srila Prabhupada told this story about Mirabai, and she had come to Vrindavan and she wanted to speak with the Goswamis. Sanatana Goswami said, we don't speak with women. And Srila Prabhupada said, she replied, there's only one Purusha here in Vraj. Prabhupada tells this story, it's so nice. So for the ladies, not that we are detoured from our service, but if we think of Devaki and Vasudeva spending years and years in jail, and the Pandavas being exiled, and Draupadi being disrobed, and Queen Kunti and her prayers, and if we think of the Mahajans, and we think of all these great devotees that have gone before us, we have had the opportunity somehow or other to prove that we will swim that moat of alligators. We will get to Krishna somehow or other. no matter what, we're determined to weather whatever comes our way. We're determined and we're unflinching in our devotion to Srila Prabhupada and Krishna, no matter what. So I think that if we keep the focus on spirit soul, and if we keep reminding one another that we're soul, that we're spirit soul, that we're not this body. It's Vaishnavism 101 is we are not this body. So if somebody tries to distract us from our service, we can just say, I'm part and parcel of Krishna's spirit soul. You know, I'm following in the footsteps of the Mahajans. They've had a lot of challenge. We are not strangers to challenge. We will persevere. And I've had some really old, cranky, crotchety, old GVCs that I've dealt with through my life that now, this many years, 51 years later, they say sadhu, sadhu to me, because I endured them, and I stood up to the abuse that they were dishing out, and I wouldn't take it. And now, finally, so many years later, they finally have some respect, but practically they're toothless now. So understand that this is not forever. It's very temporary, and we are Krishna's. So no matter what, just carry on. It'll all be perfect in the end. Hare Krishna.
I would just like to add that in my experience with devotees who are brahmacharis, the devotees who are able to acknowledge, like, let's see, I'm able to feel when I'm being acknowledged as another spirit soul that's serving Krishna as opposed to a woman. And it makes such a difference. It's actually it's been very touching for me when I have interactions with brahmacharis, sannyasis who are able to relate like that. And you can feel that they're seeing you as a soul that's striving to become Krishna conscious and to serve instead of a body, you know? And so I think that I look forward to that more and more as that culture develops, of being able to, and I know it can be difficult, especially when celibates are young, and it can be, you know, challenging to do that. But when we are able to look at each other in that way and to respect each other on a soul level, it can be very touching, and feeling like we're brothers and sisters together serving Krishna. So hopefully we can develop that more and more.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your wonderful answers. And thank you for this session.
There's just a few comments that have come in that I'd like to read. I thought they were very nice. One from Chandi, she says, yes, I love that. Also, not every Vaishnavi becomes a mother, so it's important to find our service and be supported in that. Damayanti says, I love these practical ideas. They might seem small, but they can go a long way in creating change. Chandi then again says, yes, every temple should be half women and half men instead of women in the back. The Los Angeles temple still has women in the back during kirtan, and I'm sure other temples still do this as well. And then a different Chandi says, I think it's really important to encourage our children and each other to have positive friendships with both boys and girls. A tendency can be to set up play dates for children with just the same sex, but young children don't see any differentiation. So we can support them to make friends with both, promoting support and natural collaboration regardless of gender. Just thought those were nice comments to share. Does anybody else have anything they would like to ask to our wonderful panelists today? So actually we have one question that came in from the anonymous question line. So this person says, In regards to giving class in the temple, I saw years ago that my local temple did not have any women giving class. The few women who would give class were from other neighboring temples, and they came maybe once a year. I have asked women in my community to please give class, but they did not feel qualified. So my question is, how can we encourage women to give class when we see them being qualified, but they do not see it in themselves?
I think part of the problem is that we expect to go from 0 to 60. You know, you never speak and now you're going to sit on the Vyasasana and give Bhagavatam class. If you see how brahmacharis are trained up, they're given speaking assignments, you know, smaller ones, and they get to that point. We don't do that for Vaishnavis. So for me, home programs were really important in learning how to give class, because that was a space where I could, you know, speak for 10 minutes. I could learn kind of what's different about speaking on scripture versus, you know, the kind of speaking I do in my day job. And then, of course, to encourage each other, to empower each other, you know, so invite some ladies over and take turns, you know, 5 minutes on the verse, whatever. And then also, you know, as Vaishnavis, we have to sometimes, Pranada said, step out of our comfort zone, you know. And I just really want to honor Sham Mandali and Shyamala Kishori for what you're doing. You know, you're taking responsibility, you're speaking out, and it's so inspiring to me. You know, I have no doubt that we are leaving ISKCON in competent hands, and I'm not worried about the future. So thank you.
Perhaps as an, I know I give class here, and one of the things I've really been enjoying doing is I make PowerPoint presentations as my class. And I love all the pictures I can find online to plug in. So much spiritual subject matter is available to, and but one of the ideas that just came up for me when you were saying about 10 minutes, and I remember being asked in Vrindavan. Vrindavan's probably the scariest place to give class because there's all these scholars. And but whenever I'd be asked to talk about Srila Prabhupada, I would always ask to speak with another lady, so it could be conversational. Perhaps if, like say, 2 ladies gave class on a verse, and they brought in the conversational aspect of giving class, it could be less difficult. Just like even this, we have a panel here, so it isn't all on one person. Like Nagapatni and I, we do the question and answer booth at Rath Yatra, but it's the 2 of us. So we field it to one another, and it's just really nice. Like and then you get your training wheels going, and pretty soon you can actually do it without the training wheels. Perhaps we can do something like that where more than one lady gives class, and it gets to be more comfortable.
I would just like to add that when children are young, it's a great time to start practicing with them. When I was a kid, my parents sometimes we would do a program at home, and we would just take turns giving short mini Bhagavatam classes. And that really boosts, I think, child's confidence in being able to speak about Krishna. So that's also a helpful way.
Thank you so much for those wonderful answers. I'd just like to ask, is there anyone else who would like to ask anything before we finish this evening's session? Just opening it up one last time for anybody else. Okay, well, it seems like...
I have one more idea.
Absolutely.
Yes, and it's just, because I love the word you use, systematically. okay, now that's great, systematically. And that means developing ideas and putting something into effect that can become automatic because there's a system. So one of the things, perhaps, if there are because just by doing this, I was talking to a dear friend and saying, we should start a women's group here in Hawaii. You know, I'm the temple president, why not? We should start a women's group. And it just like we have child protection, if we had a women's group and we diagnosed that there was some kind of chronic derogatory rhetoric coming out of a particular, we might invite them to a discussion with the women's group, so that they began to see that there was actually some kind of, you know, that we're human beings, we're devotees too, and that they can't really get away with continuing to think and speak in this way. Perhaps if we had women's groups and we literally did, not that we're going out to find anything, but out very compassionately bring them in and say, no, we really are concerned that this may not be the best thing for your service. Might be a start too in part of the systematic process of re-educating one another.
Yes, that's a really wonderful point. Thank you so much. I'm just getting a message that there is one more question on the anonymous question forum. Just one moment. Just waiting for that to come in. So the question is, in regard to using feminism as a discrediting term, we could also say so of chauvinism, but there appears to be only an anti-feminist police in ISKCON. What can we do to raise awareness on micro-chauvinist and misogynist attitudes that are ingrained in our traditions and teachings? Is the question clear?
Yeah. Okay, so I come from a culture where women don't necessarily use the most direct communication methods. So I tend to be more comfortable, you know, with the submissive, humble attitude. And in my case, it's something I do. It's not coming from the heart. It's a, you know, tactic that I use. But I do, for me personally, find that responding in kind to some of these statements is not terribly effective. That, you know, just we can identify and we can label just as well as they can, but it's not taking the conversation forward. It's not helping us to understand each other, and we'll never change anybody's mind by doing that.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to share?
I didn't understand the question, but also, Radha, what would you say is the solution to that?
The solution is to redirect the conversation. You know, what do you mean when you call me a feminist? What is it that you object? In other words, don't just accept the label. You know, make them define their terms. Bring the conversation back onto our message, which is that all devotees should be given the facility to engage their talents and inclinations in Krishna service.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and I really appreciated the practical application of how we can turn that around.
One thing that I'd like to add is the point about it does seem like so much of the scripture is geared towards male, he. But rather than make it a gender issue at all, I would say they, because it's neutral. And then I think if we came from a neutral perspective and just took gender out of it, in most cases, there would be less defense. I think that we need to plan strategically to try to work smarter, not harder, and rather than err on the side of supposed feminism, maybe spiritism or something, I don't know. Just bring it to the spiritual level and off of the gender issue altogether. Even in the spiritual world, the gopis and the gopas are having their pastimes, and they're fun. They're proclaiming that Srimati Radharani is Vrindavaneshwari. If we had it that it was competition to serve Krishna more beautifully, with more love, and it was more playful, like Leela, bringing it onto the spiritual platform, then it would be really fun. But if we take it seriously and it's on the level of ego and bodily consciousness, it will never be fun. I want it to be fun. I want it to be about Krishna all the time. Hariko.
Right, thank you so much. That seems like the perfect note to end this evening on. I want to thank all of you panelists so very much from the bottom of my heart for sharing with us this evening and opening up and sharing your struggles. We greatly appreciate that, and as the next generation of this movement, the responsibility is going to be falling into our hands. So this wisdom is so important for us so that we can learn from the mistakes of the past and hopefully not have to repeat them and go through them again, and stay more true to Srila Prabhupada's original vision of what he wanted for ISKCON. Thank you again. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you everyone for attending, for listening, for your questions and participation. We are so grateful for you, and we hope to have more conversations and events like this to really gain a deeper understanding of Krishna consciousness in a wonderful, practical, down-to-earth and personal way. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Thank you.
Mandali. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.